Good evening. I'm Peter Taylor, president of Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation. On behalf of a partnership involving the Berkshire Eagle, the Berkshire Bank, it's my privilege to welcome you to the final session of the Bridging Divides Healing Community Speaker Series. This series is part of a broader foundation initiative aimed at strengthening relationships and trust at the local level. This work is critical now when forces and trends have the potential to drive us apart, including deep political and social divisions, widening income disparities, and enduring systemic racism. We know the solutions to our challenges are at hand, however, because tonight we're going to hear from 3 community leaders who are doing this challenging and important work. The projects led by our panelists are bringing people together to explore shared interests, address problems through dialogue and action, or consider an issue through a range of perspectives. These projects were funded by a small grants program launched by the foundation last November that you'll learn more about tonight. The broader goal of strengthening community engagement is one of the foundation's 3 strategic priorities. Coming together to work side by side to get things done is part of our heritage as a region, and building off this strong ethic of engagement is an imperative now and for the future. We believe at the foundation that fostering community engagement, especially towards bridging differences, is a critical ingredient to vibrant and inclusive communities. The Bridging Divides Healing Communities initiative is part of a $2 million portfolio of grants and programmatic activities in support of this goal. Although this is the close of this 4-part series, we hope it's just the beginning of community conversations about how we can do better together. Towards that end, I'm pleased to announce that the foundation will be continuing pursuing these themes of building connections in community through a new partnership with Berkshire Film and Media Collaborative and the Civic Life Project. These 2 well-respected organizations have come together for the first time to launch a video challenge to amplify the voices of young people. Stay with us until the conclusion of this evening's panel for more information on this new project. It's now my privilege to introduce our session's moderator, my colleague and friend, Suzette Masters. In addition to being a national expert on social cohesion with a deep background in philanthropy, Suzette also serves on the Community Foundation's Board of Directors. Let me now turn it over to Suzette.
I hope you can all see me. Can you? Hopefully. Thank you, Peter. Welcome to Resident-Led Solutions, the final session in the 4-part series Peter just mentioned. I'm Suzette Brooks Masters, and I'm excited to serve as your moderator this evening. I'm Senior Strategist at the Center for Inclusion and Belonging in Washington, D.C. I work with nonprofits and foundations to ensure that American democracy meets its pluralistic potential. Unfortunately, that's no longer a foregone conclusion. The last 3 sessions in this series have explored a few macro-level themes: how we're confronting hard truths about our past and seeing how racism and other forms of discrimination have become embedded in institutions, practices, and policies in both the private and public sectors, how we're living in more and more insular environments with fewer opportunities to connect across differences and be in proximity to others who aren't like us, how we're being ripped apart by extremely high levels of partisan tribalism, by polarization and fear, and how social and opinion media are reinforcing in-group thinking and manipulating our emotions, making local journalism and shared facts more important than ever. Those are some pretty stiff headwinds. Is there anything we can do to knit together and heal our communities, to create greater proximity? The answer is yes, and that's what this last session is about: efforts at the local level to strengthen community ties and provide connective tissue. Research shows that if you set the table the right way and make sure to listen to people without judgment and with respect, you can solve problems together and create environments where everyone feels they belong. You might even find common ground on issues you didn't think possible. We're highlighting 3 projects that were funded by the Bridging Divides Healing Communities Grants Program, a new initiative at the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation. Early this year, we awarded small grants to support 21 projects that met the following objectives out of the 70 applications received. The foundation intends to do another round of funding later this year. Let's look at this slide to review briefly these grant-making objectives. First, to create new and/or strengthen existing relationships among people of different backgrounds, experiences, or beliefs. Forge connections around a shared experience through which participants can explore different points of view, and bring people together to pursue a common goal, regardless of differences that may exist among the group. Now, I'd like to talk about a few common themes that emerged from the projects that we funded. So let's look at this grant-making themes slide briefly. So 4 big themes emerged. First, grantees engaged a diverse array of people connected to the Berkshire Taconic region across race, gender, ethnicity, country of origin, and class. And this is exactly what we wanted to happen. Grantees used creative media and adept facilitation and moderation to create safe spaces for discovery, contestation, listening, and learning. Again, this was one of the key objectives. Many of the projects use storytelling to bridge differences and surface varied perspectives. And finally, the projects were designed to build connection and trust. Obviously, that takes time, but we feel that we've gotten off to a really good start. And obviously, when you build trust, that can lead to really good things like discovering common ground, sharing moral agreements, or even ushering in reconciliation. I'd now like to introduce our 3 panelists who led projects in Columbia County, New York, Litchfield County, Connecticut, and Berkshire County, Massachusetts, 3 of the 4 catchment areas of the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation. They will bring to life the how of bridge building and healing, something that's even more challenging to accomplish during a pandemic. Mayor Kamal Johnson was elected to serve as the mayor of Hudson, New York in 2019. He made history as the first Black mayor of Hudson, and at 34 years of age, as the youngest. Previously, Mayor Johnson was executive director of the Greater Hudson Promise neighborhood. Meg Scher is the assistant director of the David M. Hunt Library in Falls Village, Connecticut. Her husband, Adam Scher, a civic educator and community organizer, and her friend, photographer Rebecca Bloomfield, were the core team behind the Small Town Big Talk project, which you'll hear about shortly. And finally, Dr. Frances Jones Sneed is a professor emeritus of history, political science, and public policy at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. And she's associate editor of African American Heritage in the Upper Housatonic Valley. She's a board member of Clinton Church Restoration.
Sneed.
We'll begin by asking the panelists to briefly describe their funded projects. I'll then engage them in conversation and then open things up to questions from you, the audience. So please put your questions into the Q&A feature when one pops into your mind. So Kamal, I'd like to start with you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Kamal Johnson. I'm the mayor of the city of Hudson. It's always like funny when I hear the introduction because I was then 34, but now I'm the older age of 36. So I feel like I'm a veteran now. But in Hudson, about a year ago, we started to look at where our community was as far as community policing and some of the relationships in our community regarding communities of color, communities of lower socioeconomic means, and how they felt about some of their relationships with our police. During that, I put out an executive order after the death of George Floyd, which kind of swept through our nation and instilled a lot of change across municipalities. And one of the things that I wanted to do was put together a committee called PARC, a Police Advisory Reconciliation Committee. and it was a committee of different leaders in our community, as well as community members and police, to talk about the relationship between policing in our community and how that would look. Those early conversations were very dicey. Police felt, they were not being heard, or that there was going to be some kind of changes to the way they do their job that wasn't going to be unfair to them. And then we dealt with a community that felt like they weren't being heard, and change would never come out of this. So what we did is we had everybody kind of sit down, give their points of view, and we started crafting these reforms. And we crafted reforms that would help the police officers in their job. One of the early reforms was a program for them, an employee assistance program, where if they had any needs that they need to handle, be it mental health, they're going through a divorce, or alcohol abuse or substance abuse, they would have a resource for them to take care of, so that they would correctly be able to do their job, which is a very stressful job. And looking at the reforms and meeting with the committee, I started seeing that, to build trust in a community that feels like they have been taken advantage of, and a culture that really needed to be changed, it was going to take more than a year. So out of this reforms, we started building these community events where the police would come into the community and talk to community members, and there would be a trust that would be built in this circle. And what we kind of built was a safe space for people to talk and people to be heard, as well as officers as well. And I realized that we weren't going to accomplish the mission that we wanted to accomplish in a year. Whenever you're going after something that hasn't been done before, or is going to be a culture change, it's going to take some time. And that's when we applied with Berkshire Taconic to kind of get some funds to allow us to get some incentives to bring in more people of color, to bring in food, and allow us to bring these meetings to the people. And so far it's been extremely helpful. I think that there's an early advantage now where people are really feeling the trust, and that, this is something that's going to work, but at the same time, it's also a marathon and not a race. So I'm very excited to be on the panel tonight. I'm honored to be here along with the other panelists and their initiatives. Had a great time the past couple of weeks learning about their initiatives, and look forward to hearing more tonight.
Great. Thank you, Kamal. Meg, up to you now.
Hi, everyone. So my project is called Small Town Big Talk. I worked on it with Adam Shermer, who happens to be my husband, who did the interviews, and our friend Rebecca Bloomfield, who is an incredible photographer. We produced an interactive exhibition of portraits and quotes. You can see them behind me at the library, and we're also going to see a couple in a few minutes. We talked to 23 different people from Falls Village, Connecticut. We had socially distant outdoor interviews in December and January of this year, and we asked everyone the same 5 questions, which they got in advance. The questions were, where do you feel a sense of belonging? What are some of your hopes for our town and our country? What is a belief you hold that has changed over time? What are some of your concerns about the future? And have you ever felt misunderstood? So our hope was to break through the small talk that you often do at the post office and really get into bigger questions with people and really hear what was on their minds and what was concerning to them. The exhibition has been at the library it opened in mid-March, and it'll be there until June. You can access it in person at the library or online at huntlibrary.org. And I'm going to share a couple of portraits and quotes with you now. So this first portrait is Judy Jacobs. I'm hoping that Falls Village doesn't lose its identity. We've always been kind of unique in that every type of person intermingles here because we're so small and our neighbors are right there with us. I'd hate to lose that. I want to stay Falls Village. That doesn't mean I don't want to see growth. I just want to see it where it's bringing everyone together. There's always a resistance to change, but there's always change, whether it's good or bad. You have to have control of it. I do hope we have a change that continues. We have a change that continues where we can all be included in it. Next slide, please. This quote is from Ted Moy. I used to believe I could have a conversation and it would be a back and forth, a conversation where people were trying to hear each other and to understand where the other was standing. My belief has changed now. I'm not positive that understanding is the motivation, my motivation, or that of the people across the table from me. The actual motivation is to validate our own positions. Everything you learned has to be right, so what the other person is saying couldn't possibly be. The conversation ends up being, this is what I've heard, you're saying what you've heard, you're wrong, and that's it. I see it in myself. I'm getting disheartened by these conversations. They're not input, output. They're just two types of output clashing together with each other. I'm a part of it. I don't know when that started, but I have to own my piece of it. Next slide, please. This quote is from Julia Ulf. My mother is Jewish European. My father was Black and American Indian. I see the world through several lenses. What I think about is that we judge each other based on how we look oftentimes, but how I look doesn't represent how I feel. I feel like I may be misunderstood if you don't allow me to feel and think the way I do based on my life experience. Lots of people feel that way for different reasons. Your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your religious affiliation. You can't know from the outside how people feel, so I too have to work at being sensitive to what I see doesn't tell me a whole lot about how someone thinks and feels. So these are 3 of the 23 interviews that happened as part of this project. And I also want to mention that it is an interactive project. So if you come into the library or go to huntlibrary.org, there's an option to answer these questions yourself. We have an iPad that shows a revolving display of people's answers, and we always love adding to those answers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Frances, we'd love to hear about your project now.
Good evening. Yes, our project was a collaboration with the Mehewi Theater, and I represent a Clinton Church Restoration, which is a fairly new organization. We're about 3 or 4 years old, and we are trying to restore a historic Black church to make it into an African-American center for the Berkshires, really focusing in on African-Americans in the Berkshires, and especially W.E.B. Du Bois, who grew up in Great Barrington and who worked with some of the early church leaders. The Mehewi came to CCR and suggested a collaboration with a playwright. His name is Leland Gant, and he had done a virtual play, a one-man play, and which is called Rhapsody in Black. And we showed Leland's 90-minute play over a period of time in March to people coming into the virtual stage, and also showed a 60-minute version of it to school children in Southern Berkshires. And we rounded that out in the very last night by having a panel discussion, which I led. We had a public school teacher from Pittsfield on that panel, a former student from Pittsfield High School, and Leland himself. And we had a great conversation about race and what race is. And so I'd like to show you just about a minute and a half of what the virtual play was about.
I'm just trying to start a conversation.
You may write me down in a history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me down in the very dirt, and still like the dust I'll rise.
Growing up in the ghettos of McKeesport, Pennsylvania, I walk around these neighborhoods imagining what it might be like to live here. My choices, like yours, had everything to do with the information I had at the time, right? Hustlers and players with shine shoes twinkling on their feet, fine booty women hanging on their arms, and money seeming to fall out of their pockets. That's a group, a herd, a flock, a gaggle of clearly non-racist white people. And you felt the need to tell one of them the story. Seek and ye shall find, and if you don't find it, put it there, huh? That makes me no better than that profiling Princess Cop at West 4th Street. Picture this. Each of us, an antibody fighting that cancer in the body of our society, and that just by having or being willing to have serious conversations about these things, we would be acting like white blood cells, the superheroes of the body, tracking down and destroying our own little bits of encountered racism until racism didn't exist anymore.
I'll rise, 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 I'm gonna rise, I'll rise, I'll rise, rise, rise.
You can tell from this clip how dynamic Leland is in his performance. And so the feedback that we got and the questions that we got from the audience were just great. In fact, the three panelists had so many questions for Leland that we didn't even give the audience hardly a chance. In fact, we actually went over our 60 minutes and we had to be told that we had to cut our conversation off. So this was a wonderful, I think, demonstration of how art can come in to really kind of talk about a difficult subject matter. And especially when you're talking about it with school children and audiences that don't necessarily think about race on a daily basis, because in the Berkshires, the population is 96% white. And so those of us, people of color who live in the Berkshires, face racism every day, but yet we don't know how to describe that necessarily. Leland gave us a great vehicle to do that through an artistic kind of way. And we hope that we can collaborate again with another organization to bring Leland or someone like him again to the Berkshires to help us with that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. What amazing projects. And these were just 3 of 21 that were funded. So there's a lot of good work happening in this area. So what I'd like to do now is engage all of you in some conversation just to probe a little bit more deeply into the design of your programs, to try to figure out how you thought through building trust and eliciting the kind of reactions that you wanted from your audience. Because I think we all talk a lot about bridging divides and healing, but it's really difficult to do. And the table, as I said, has to be set just right. So Kamal, I'd love to start with you. You obviously were dealing with, as you mentioned, some pretty contentious issues in a highly charged national environment. And you had, as you described, people on quote unquote both sides of this issue who had some emotions about these issues. So I wanted you to talk a little bit more about how you set the table. You know, were there ground rules? How did you break the ice? How did you think through giving each side a way to share what they needed to share and get to that safe space that you were talking about?
Yeah, and I think to start that out, I had to, give a little bit of myself to the group to let them kind of understand that this was a space where everybody's going to be heard, and like whatever happens here is going to be progress for our city, no matter what. And when I started talking to the group, I kind of explained to them that as myself, as a young Black man, my first time taking office, when I went to go meet with the police, I sat in the station and my anxiety was just through the roof. And, here I am, the highest elected official in the city. And I was just super nervous being in the station because culturally, this is, where you go where you're being arrested or, that. And I started sitting there, and as I sat there with my anxiety going crazy, I kind of wondered, about our young people, and like, this shouldn't be their first interaction with officers, is when they're getting arrested. So a lot of times, when you bring up reform to police officers, they start to say like, what happens nationally is not happening here, or, we don't have that issue. So just being able to explain to them that this is not about you individually. This is about a cultural issue and an issue of trust. And I think once people were able to kind of tell their stories and feel some sort of empathy, you started to see those kind of shields kind of melt down and people listen more and be willing to be heard. And, you know, as every participant and every person who is on the committee, you know, they're there as volunteers. So they're there to 100% be a part of the solution. And I think as others started to see that, that's when we start to, you know, we were able to see some progress.
And were there any specific rules, just to get even a little more granular, like the way you set up the process?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little more about what that looked like?
Yeah, I think, you know, we went around and basically let it be known that this is a safe space. These are just opinions right now and feelings, and that everybody's entitled to feel how they want to feel. We're not here to necessarily change anyone's mind, but we're here to listen at this moment and to do it without, you know, interrupting anyone or, you know, catching offense to anything anyone is saying. And even with adults, that's not the easiest thing to do, but once you kind of break that barrier and it becomes the culture of the committee, then you know, you'll see progress.
So basically you created a new culture for this committee, for Park.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Meg, I'd like to ask the same question to you. Obviously, completely different setting, set of issues, but you were trying to build trust as well and get the residents of a very small town to look at each other slightly differently and engage more deeply with each other. So tell me a little bit and tell the audience about how you conceived of it, why you chose the questions you chose, and, you know, any issues that came up when you were, you know, trying to even get people to participate.
Sure. So Rebecca had done a similar project in high school. She had also hosted something called the People's Supper a couple of years ago that brings people from diverse backgrounds together to have dinner together and have conversations. So we had been talking about how to do something like that again, and then we saw this grant, so the timing was perfect. I think something that made it easy for people, I think there are a few things. I think the library hosting it made a big difference in our situation. We have a very small town. There's 1,200 people in Falls Village. The library serves as a community center. Everyone is welcome here. People are used to meeting new people and being exposed to new ideas here, and I think that helped. Also, people received the questions in advance, and so they had time to really dive deep into them and think about them. Also, people obviously elected to do this. We asked for people to volunteer. I think, you know, I think we had wished perhaps for a little more diversity in terms of political diversity, a little more socioeconomic diversity. But I think that there is still diversity to be found in the different points of view from the 23 participants. And I think something we really noticed was that people were really willing to share. And I think there were a few reasons for that. You know, we were deep in the winter of the pandemic when we did these interviews. Adam did a great job of really listening and being open to people and hearing what they were saying. And I think people were everyone was starved for social interaction at that time. And I think sharing, really being asked deep questions and being listened to was something that people appreciated and were happy to engage with.
Great, thanks. And Francis, same question to you, because I think it's sort of the magic sauce, right? The special sauce in putting these events together or these projects together to get the outcome that you want. How were you thinking about using this particular performance, choosing Leland, and then also, you know, engaging with the audience the way you chose to engage? Just tell us a little more about the design of your session.
I think that the design of our session, I have to give credit to the Mehawi staff, because Leland had been in the Berkshires a number of years ago, working with the school system, and they really liked him. And so they reached out to Clinton Church Restoration as a new organization, and an organization that had that was centered on people of color, and especially African Americans, so that we could kind of talk about that in a different kind of way. And so the Mehawi's audience is typically white, typically upper class, and so does not have a reach necessarily into the African American community. And so that's where CCR came in. And so we brainstormed about exactly how we would do this. And just from 1 or 2 sessions with the Mehawi people and the staff at CCR, we came up with a suggestion of having a panel discussion, inviting a young African-American male who happens to be teaching school in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is the largest town in Berkshire County, and also a student, so that we could get the student point of view. And so it was really great, the panel discussion, and asked Leland some questions that he said he had never heard before. And it gives the audience the view that the African-American community is not a monolith. You know, everybody is just not the same, and we face different problems in different kinds of ways. And so just getting that over, I think, was a great kind of thing for us to do with that production.
Great. And I'd just like to add one little add-on question. So through all of your programs, you've started something, and you've started something positive. What do you think it's going to take to build on that? You know, I forgot who it was. I think it was Kamal who said it was a marathon, not a sprint. And you knew that you needed to extend what you had begun, and that's why you applied for this grant. But in all of your cases, you're working on issues of belonging, you're working on issues of racism. These are not easy issues to solve. So if you could each wave a magic wand, a realistic magic wand, okay, so a moderate amount of resources, and you could do more. What is there something you would like to do to extend what you've begun? So Kamal, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for us, and which is one of the main reasons we applied for this grant, is we really wanted to take the conversations into the community. You know, we wanted to utilize our local restaurants and businesses, and we wanted to go in areas where it takes you out of the confines of City Hall or any of these meetings where it feels so stuffy that people are intimidated to go in. So that's like our main thing. Once COVID, you know, successfully lets us do that, that'll be the first goal. Great.
And Meg, what about you?
I think we would love to have interviewed more than 23 people. I think when this project started, you know, we were like 25, 50, and then, you know, there are time constraints. And we would love to reach more Falls villagers. And we would also love to take this to other places. I think it could be a useful, you know, it could be useful in a lot of different communities.
Great. And then Frances, what about you?
Certainly the pandemic limits exactly what we could do with this, in that really kind of getting out into the community and having somebody like Leland actually put on workshops with high schoolers, with the college students, with community members, of telling their own stories of race, one way or the other. And because I think that would be a wonderful kind of thing to do.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd like to now ask a different question to all of you, which is really getting at the heart of the matter. I'm sure some members of our audience are thinking about how to do this better. And so I'm wondering if you could share what you've learned, what advice you might give to people who want to initiate a project of this type. Whether, you know, it could be a different set of issues, a different axis of difference, but there's some core principles and core lessons, I think, that bind a lot of this work together. And I was wondering if we could talk a little more about that. So I'll go in a slightly different order this time. I'm going to start with Francis. What do you think are the key lessons that you'd want to share about doing this successfully?
Gee, I was going to piggyback on Meg and Kamal, you know, and just say whatever they said. I think that collaboration is great. And I think, especially coming from a small organization, that you should not be shy about approaching other organizations that are larger than you with creative ideas and creative projects. You think sometimes because you're small, you can't do certain kinds of things. But, you know, it's amazing when you go to the larger organizations, how open they are to some of the creative ideas that you have. And so don't be afraid to step out with your ideas and things like that. That's, I think, what we learned.
Great. And Meg, what about you?
I was just thinking about how in some ways COVID gave us an opportunity. The library has an art wall. We show art exhibitions, 12 times a year. And only during COVID did we move online. And so having an online presence for this exhibit has allowed us to engage with people outside of Falls Village in a way that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. It would have been a place-based exhibition. And I think that that was really valuable for us. Adding more voices, having people who don't live here engage with this. And the other thing I was thinking about was reaching people. I saw one of the questions pop up asking how I would want to reach more, people in the different socioeconomic strata, and just thinking about, I think if we did this again, putting more effort into reaching people through different venues, through the local newspaper or the radios, or maybe going door to door, putting posters up, really trying to use every venue that we can to get people in town involved.
And I just want to push a little further. Obviously, people had to volunteer and be willing to put their words, for the whole community to see.
Yeah.
And in, some of those words were pretty intense and showed a lot of vulnerability, and, some of them were a little bit dark, frankly, right, in their view of the world. So I guess I'm just wondering how the community has reacted to seeing those words. Like, have you gotten a sense of when people are viewing the art wall or just talking about it, were people surprised, by what they saw, what their neighbors shared?
So two main things came up. The first, we have an influx of new people, like a lot of other towns around here. And we tried to really find a mix of, people who have lived here for a long time and are well-known faces, and some new faces. And so it's been fun to see people come in and be surprised that they live in this tiny town where they think they know everyone and they don't actually. And I think that sparked some interest in getting to know their neighbors more. And that's been something that I've really enjoyed. And also, over and over again, people come in and leave saying something like, there's so much wisdom in this town. I think people are really grateful for the perspectives, whatever they are, and the fact that people were willing to be so open and share so much.
That's great. And Kamal, you've obviously learned a lot about mediating some pretty tricky terrain that could be helpful, I think, to a lot of people. So I know you've talked about different aspects of this, but what do you think was the key to building the trust and extending the trust and deepening the trust over time?
I think for us and, a lot of people who are going to start new initiatives, it's all about just having patience. It's not going to happen overnight. You may throw an event and 0 people come. And that doesn't mean that it's not something that's necessary or wanted. It just means you have to go back to the drawing board. And for me personally, when I first kind of opened up this box, everybody was like, oh my God, is he crazy? Like, why are you doing this? And then our governor kind of laid out an executive order that said all municipalities had to do this. And this was 2 weeks after, we started this journey. So then it became Hudson's ahead of the ball. So I think for us, it's just, work on your own time and have patience and understand that it's going to just keep continuously taking grinding. And if it was easy, people would have started a long time ago.
Yeah, that's very true. So I'm going to stop hogging the questions here, because I see there have been a bunch of good questions that have been popping up. So I'm going to ask everyone in the audience, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat, because we have about 10 to 15 minutes for that. So I'm going to start going through the questions and directing them to you all. So here's a question for Kamal from Peter Frank. He says, thank you for the excellent work on this initiative. I particularly appreciated the respect for all stakeholders inherent in the process. I've seen the acronym PARC variously defined as advisory and reconciliation and accountability and reconciliation. This is obviously a core concern and important distinction. The recommendations of the commission were all excellent, but seem to sidestep the critical expectation of accountability in our law enforcement department. Are there longer-term plans to deepen and implement real accountability in Hudson's law enforcement culture?
Yeah, I mean, and that's, a very good question and a real issue that I saw when we took on this journey. I realized it was something that we definitely couldn't accomplish in 1 year if we were going to be realistic. So some of the things we implemented right away to address the accountability issues was a duty to intervene. So any officer that sees another officer is in the presence of another officer doing something wrong, they have a duty to intervene, and they have to report that to whoever's the mayor and their supervisor in a certain amount of time, or they're both liable for that incident and for any kind of accountability for that. We're also right now implementing a complaint system. We're trying to get that on our website and in all of our city buildings. We noticed that in order to file a complaint right now, you had to go to the police station. And a lot of people don't want to go to somewhere if they are traumatized. You don't want to go back to where you were traumatized to file a complaint. We also have more reporting that's happening now. So arrest records and everything are being reported to the committees, also to the Common Council and to myself. So the first package that you saw was the first list of measures for the reform package, and it's going to be based on a 3 to 5 year plan, with each year new measures coming out.
Great. And there's one more that came in for you, Kamal, which I'm just going to tack on. What was the most difficult conversation that you had in this process?
Yeah, I think any conversations around race are difficult. When you have, people who, it's always difficult for someone to tell you how to do your job. And, I always say this, it's like looking at an evaluation. You can have 9 things on that evaluation form that said you did all of these great, but there's that one that says this needs improvement, and that's the only one that you focused on. And, you probably disagree with it like crazy, or, it drives you crazy. You have so many opinions on that one item that needs improvement, and kind of getting us past that, it's not about individuals, it's about a culture.
Great. And now Meg and Francis, a couple questions came in about the role of the arts, theater, photography, to help people gain perspective about others, about different issues. So the questions we're asking for your opinion about how the arts can do the bridging work, can help with the bridging work. So Francis, why don't you start?
Well, I think that the arts really helped with the bridging work. What Kamal is facing there with the police in Hudson is a really difficult project. And when you come to education, using plays, and especially with somebody like Leland, who brings his own story, and in that own story is comedy and misery, and so you see the whole range of emotions in that play. And I think that people can empathize with it. And so I think that that's what art does, that you can show you another view of it. And I think people think it's easier to talk about it through art rather than some kind of concrete kind of thing when you're kind of doing that. So.
And Meg, what are your thoughts?
So Rebecca Bloomfield really specializes in candid photographs. And something that I love throughout this process was that her photos were taken while Adam was interviewing. So they weren't posed photos. So the photos that you engage with during the exhibition are people in conversation about these topics. And I think that they're different portraits than they would have been if they had been posed. And I think that you connect with them more deeply as individuals through these portraits along with the quotes because of that. Also, I've been watching people come in and have an experience with this exhibition. And I think Frances is right, having, reading these quotes, seeing the portraits, having an experience through art is different than just having a conversation with someone. It sits with you for longer, you can take your time with it, and you really get to have an individualized experience.
Great. Here's another question that came in and this is for all of you. What did you witness that most surprised you when you were working on your project to bridge divides in your community? So what most surprised you? I'll start with you, Kamal.
I think that everyone just wanted to be seen as human in some form of another. Being able to see behind the badge, and also seeing the realization of some people's testimonies about their experiences with policing and having the officers kind of take that in. I think that was like huge. And when you think of police, especially in these type of conversations, there's always a lot of tension and aggression. And to see like a more human side was, I think, big and surprising.
Meg, what about you?
Kind of similar to what Kamal said, I was surprised and really delighted by how much people bared their souls to us, how deeply they thought about these questions, came with things that they wanted to share. And you said it before, Suzette, they were deep, personal, touching things that they shared really freely. And to me, it just spoke to how much people want to be heard. What a human trait that is, to want to be heard and to be happy to share with people who want to listen.
Frances?
I was surprised about the feedback that we got from the Mehawi audience, an audience that not necessarily come to see plays like Leland's, but that the response was such a well response and wanting more of it, for, like when is he coming back? I would like to see that. I would like to see that in person. So I was really kind of surprised at that.
Great. And here's another one for all of you. Very, very interesting question. How has your own view of your community changed as a result of your project? Who wants to take that one first?
I'll take it first.
Okay.
I would say my view didn't really change that much. I think we're still early on, but I was kind of happy to see the majority of the community in favor of taking this issue on and wanting to see some change come out of this.
Meg?
I love living in this small town, and I love how friendly people are and how willing to engage with each other they are. And this project reminded me that we still fall into our silos of the people that we interact with on a daily basis. And it reminded me that to put myself out there and to introduce myself to people and the value in creating new relationships.
And Frances?
Yes, I agree with Meg, because I saw this project as a way of breaking down silos. That a lot of I've seen more and more of the arts organizations, especially in our area, are really trying to change the way that they look at art and trying to expand it to be much more diverse in the kinds of offerings that they have, and reaching out to organizations like ours in order to help with that. And I think that that was just a marvelous kind of way to kind of do it.
Great. And let's see, I'm just scrolling through the questions here. There was one question about whether you're documenting your project anywhere online. Obviously, Meg, yours is an online exhibit. Francis, is there any footage or any documentation about your project that's available?
Yes, on the Mehawi website and also on Clinton Church Restoration's website, the panel discussion, which was a little over 1 hour with Leland, is posted there. And so you can see us actually talking about the play itself.
Oh, great. Okay. And Kamal, how much of Parks deliberations are public versus private?
Yeah, the deliberations are always private because we want to make a safe space for people, but the actual report is public. So you can find the entire 100-page report on the city website, cityofhudson.org, and all of our initiatives coming up, they'll all be on the city website.
Great. And one question that just popped into my mind is, here we are digging deep on 3 of the 21 projects, and 70 projects sought support. So obviously there's a lot of work that people are trying to do to bring our communities together, especially because things are so toxic in so many other dimensions. So I'm wondering, just get your personal take on whether you think there would be value in bringing people who led these projects and had them funded together to discuss, what worked, what didn't work, share ideas. I haven't run this by Peter Taylor. I hope he's not upset that I'm even talking about this right now, but I actually think there's so much benefit in bringing together community leaders that are actually trying to stand up this kind of work and learn from each other. So I'm just curious whether that would be something that would interest any of you.
Yes, it would interest me, because just listening to Meg and Kamal about their projects, and there was a question about replication. Could these projects be replicated? And I think, yes, they can be replicated in other communities. And I certainly would like to talk with the other, people who actually got grants and exactly what kind of projects they were a part of. And I think that that would be really helpful, and probably really helpful to anybody wanting to apply to a grant, that we could tell what worked and what did not work.
Right. Any others?
Yeah, I would agree. I think someone in one of the questions said that can these be duplicated in other communities? And I think, that's what this is all about, is networking and finding out what's working in other communities, and not trying to recreate the wheel, and really bolstering what other communities are, what's working in other communities, and doing it here or there.
Right. In the age of Zoom, there's no reason you can't get 20 to 70 people talking to each other about their projects, and maybe one day a picnic. You never know. So I just want to thank all of you so much for your work, and also for sharing your precious time with us tonight and sharing details about your projects. This is the one thing that gives me hope, and you don't know what I do in my day job very much, but I'm mostly worried about all the bad systemic stuff, the way I open my remarks. And the one thing that gives me hope is hearing about efforts on the ground where people are actually fighting the polarization, and they're fighting the divides, and they're succeeding. and they're binding their neighbors together, because frankly, if we don't get it done at the local level, it's just not going to get done. It's not going to get fixed. And so all of you, the people that are doing this work in communities, you guys are my heroes. So thank you very much. So I'm going to now end this portion of the program and turn it over to the closers.
That my cue, Peter? Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Gazzello-Kiley. I am the director of the Berkshire Bank Foundation and Berkshire County Regional President for Berkshire Bank. And we're so pleased to be supporting this series, this 4-part series, which culminated this evening. I'd like to first thank Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation and the Berkshire Eagle for the invitation to be part of this program. And I also wanted to mention, it's great to see Frances Jones-Snead again. I've worked with her at MCLA many years ago and have been following your work over the years, Frances. So it's nice to see you again and hear about your project. And also Mayor Johnson, I wanted to mention that we have a branch in Hudson, so I really enjoyed hearing about your work there, and we're so proud to be part of your community. We're just so pleased to be able to participate and support this series, which has really fostered important conversation about tough topics, but topics that really need to be addressed. And in tonight's event, we're especially pleased to see what has resulted from the projects from this grant program, which we've also funded through Berkshire Bank Foundation. When we think about social justice and racial divides, it's hard sometimes to know how to begin the conversation. A lot of people want to do something, and I've heard this over and over again. What can we do? But I think this series has broken down some of those barriers and has begun to bring people together to start the conversation. And as Peter mentioned at the beginning of the program, this is hopefully just the start, and the conversation will continue, and we will continue to bring people together to find solutions to some of these really challenging issues. This work is a top priority of Berkshire Bank, and we look forward to rolling up our sleeves and continuing to support and participate in it in the months and years ahead. So I just want to thank all of you for what you're doing and what you're teaching all of us about what we can do to make our community stronger. So thank you very much.
I guess I'm next. Hi, I'm Fred Rutberg. I'm proud to be the publisher of the Berkshire Eagle, and we are proud to have sponsored this event along with Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation with the generous support of Berkshire Bank. Bridging divides, what could be more relevant to the world in which we live? The watchword that myself and my partners had when we bought the Berkshire Eagle 5 years ago were those words from Joe Klein. He said, democracy requires citizenship, and citizenship requires a town square. And we're proud at the Berkshire Eagle to be able to help be the town square for our community, and bringing the diverse voices that we heard tonight together is a great treat, and I think a fulfillment of our obligation to our community, and we're proud to be part of that. So I am grateful again to all the participants tonight, to the mayor, to Professor Snead, to Meg, and of course to Suzette for moderating. And thank you all for participating. We look to be with you again on many more events. Good night. Goodbye. Peter?
Fred. Wow, what a thoughtful and engaging conversation. I do want to first thank Mayor Johnson and Dr. Jones-Snead and Meg Scher for sharing their stories, and for Suzette for moderating. What a treat to conclude this series with such a lively, informative discussion. If you were inspired, participants on the session were inspired by the stories of the panelists, please be on the lookout in the coming months for an announcement of a second round of grants that will be available to provide resources to community groups who want to bring people together with who hold different viewpoints and come from different backgrounds. As I shared at the top of the program, we also want to lift up the voices of young people and allow them to tell their stories about how communities are coming together and how differences are being bridged through their perspective. As I shared, we are launching a video challenge with the expert guidance of two well-respected organizations, the Berkshire Film and Media Collaborative and the Civic Life Project. It's modeled after video film challenge the Civic Life Project did last fall on democracy in the months leading up to the election. And that film challenge received over 500 submissions. So we're excited about the prospects of having young people bring their voices into this conversation. I want to conclude just by thanking our partners in this effort, the Berkshire Bank and the Berkshire Eagle. We could not have accomplished this unless we didn't work together on these important themes to offer this series. And finally, I want to thank all who participated. We had over 80 participants tonight, and all total across the four-part series, we had over 450 residents of this broader region join in this conversation. And as I shared, it's not the conclusion, but just the beginning, as there is so much work that we can continue to do together. So with that, good evening, and thank you for participating.